Donald Trump hailed the moment as the dawn of a golden age. Yet the true shape of this agreement remains shrouded in uncertainty. Officials caution that the deal is still taking form. Even as the guns fall quiet, the terms remain fluid and unresolved. For now, however, the brinkmanship between Washington and Tehran has given way to a tense and watchful calm. The ceasefire follows a volatile stretch marked by fiery rhetoric and military posturing, including earlier U.S. demands for Iran's unconditional surrender. But there has been no clear indication that those demands were ever fulfilled. Analysts warn this pause may be less a resolution and more a breath held. A prolonged conflict threatened to send shockwaves far beyond the battlefield, jeopardizing regional stability and rattling global energy markets. For now, the fighting has stopped, but the uncertainty lingers, and the world watches what comes next. Iran, meanwhile, has maintained its position throughout the conflict, with officials signaling readiness to respond to escalation while avoiding direct large-scale confrontation. Military observers say Iran's strategy focused on widening the scope of tension, raising the potential costs of escalation across the region. The conflict also highlighted the continued presence of Iran-aligned groups across the Middle East, including actors in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. While their level of direct involvement varied, their activity contributed to sustained regional pressure. Despite significant strikes reported during the conflict, there is no clear indication that Iran's strategic capabilities or regional influence have been decisively reduced. Attention is now shifting toward the possibility of renewed negotiations as diplomatic channels reopen following the ceasefire announcement. Key questions remain over Iran's nuclear program and future regional posture, as well as the broader framework for any long-term agreement. Across the Gulf, regional governments are closely monitoring developments, with security calculations increasingly under review. Officials in the region are expected to explore a more diversified approach to partnerships amid uncertainty over long-term security guarantees. Israel has also not formally indicated that its strategic objectives have been fully achieved, with security concerns over Iran remaining in place.
Wenn Sie es leid sind, ständig die Brille zu wechseln, müssen Sie das hier probieren. Wirft deine veralteten Lesebrillen und teuren Gleitsichtgläser weg. Eine Brille kann alle Bedürfnisse erfüllen. Diese intelligente Autofokusbrille aus der deutschen Optikstadt Jena erfasst dein...
In Washington, the political impact of the ceasefire is still unfolding, with the administration expected to frame the pause as a strategic success. Experts say the broader implications of the conflict extend beyond the immediate ceasefire, highlighting shifts in global power dynamics and regional security structures. While the United States remains a dominant global force, recent developments suggest increasing complexity in how influence is exercised. For now, the ceasefire offers a window of de-escalation, but the long-term outcome will depend on whether diplomacy can succeed where confrontation has paused.
In some fresh escalation, Hezbollah has claimed a direct strike on one of Israel's most advanced battle tanks along the Israel-Lebanon border. According to Hezbollah, a Merkava tank was destroyed in a precision attack carried out using a suicide drone near the Khiam detention center. But the escalation did not stop there, as Hezbollah announced a sweeping wave of coordinated attacks across northern Israel, claiming multiple operations in a single day targeting both military positions and civilian settlements. Rocket barrages were reported against multiple locations, including Kiryat Shmona, Metula, Misgao Am, and Dovi, as well as strategic sites like Gajar, with repeated strikes on some areas, suggesting a sustained and calculated offensive strategy. Hezbollah described these operations as part of a broader campaign to pressure Israeli forces, with fighters targeting troop gatherings and military infrastructure in rapid succession over several hours. The scale of the offensive becomes even striking when placed in a broader timeline, as the group also claimed to have carried out 72 operations just a day earlier, targeting military barracks and more than 30 cities and settlements. According to these claims, a mix of rockets, guided missiles, and light weapons were used in the attacks, with Hezbollah asserting that it successfully destroyed tanks, troop carriers, and fortified bunkers during the operations. As both sides remain locked in a cycle of strikes and counter-strikes, the situation on the ground appears increasingly fragile, with each new attack raising the stakes and narrowing the path toward de-escalation.
Did the US badly botch its rescue operation in Isfahan, as Tehran's AI video showcases American failure rather than victory on Iranian soil? Iranian videos show military assets destroyed and jets blown up. Is this the reality of a US op that ran into far stronger Iranian resistance than Washington admits? Days after the incident, why is the US still hiding the rescued airman's identity, while Iran confidently shapes the story from the battlefield to the information space? Iranian outlets leaked an ID card and a credit card allegedly found in the F-15 wreckage. Is Tehran signaling that it, not Washington, holds the real evidence of what happened in Isfahan? Iran released an AI-generated video that it claims depicts the US rescue operation carried out in Isfahan, showing a stylized reconstruction of the mission on Iranian soil. The Iranian embassy in South Africa amplified this narrative by sharing the state-run Press TV video on X on April 10th, pushing the clip to an international audience. In its accompanying X post, the embassy asserted that US forces suffered a major defeat in Isfahan, directly linking the video to a claimed American setback. The AI video shows Iranian forces allegedly decimating American jets and other military equipment, portraying significant US hardware losses during the operation. In one segment of the video, the alleged ID card and American personnel is also visible, tying the imagery to downed US aircraft. The AI-produced footage further depicts American C-130 transport aircraft being destroyed, suggesting that support and evacuation assets were also hit. Earlier this week, separate videos allegedly showing the wreckage of the downed F-15 jet circulated online, purporting to display debris from the aircraft. Those circulating videos included images of a US flag, a wallet, and identification documents said to belong to a US service member involved in the incident. One widely shared image featured an ID card displaying the name Amanda N. Ryder, and the same name and card imagery also appear inside the new AI video. Another snippet highlighted both the front and back of a Platinum American Express credit card, adding further personal details linked to the service member. All of this unfolded as the United States conducted a mission to rescue an airman after Iran downed an F-15 jet on April 3rd, providing context for the AI and wreckage videos.
Endlich Frühling. Nur noch kurz den Rasen mähen.
Notably, the downed officer survived wounded for over 24 hours in the mountains before US teams managed to reach him. The rescue, involving about 200 troops, took place after US forces established a temporary base inside Iranian territory. Trump said early radio contact with the airman triggered fears that Iran might be spoofing signals to lure US rescuers into an ambush. Officials suspected possible deception after picking up an unusual transmission that did not fully match expected communications. Trump said that what the stranded airman said on the radio sounded like something a Muslim would say. The stranded officer hid in a mountain crevice and later managed to authenticate his identity to US forces, according to initial accounts. US intelligence used a range of surveillance tools to pinpoint his precise location under hostile and rapidly changing conditions. For this operation, the US deployed several highly specialized aircraft, including the MC-130J Commando 2, a long-range special operations transport configured for dangerous, low-visibility insertions. The MC-130J is among the most advanced aircraft in the US inventory, designed to operate in hostile environments, penetrate defended airspace, and support covert or special operations forces. Each MC-130J is estimated to cost over $100 million, underscoring the enormous financial stakes involved when such platforms are committed to a single mission. These aircraft are equipped with sophisticated sensors, secure communications, and the ability to refuel in midair, enabling them to penetrate deep into contested territory and remain on station for extended periods. Despite their advanced capabilities, the mission reportedly encountered major challenges on the ground, including intense Iranian air defenses and local militia activity. US officials have confirmed that 2 of these MC-130J craft were destroyed during the course of the operation, marking a significant material loss for the US Special Operations Aviation Fleet. According to the Tasnim news agency, Iranian defenses targeted multiple US aerial assets, including helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft, during the high-risk raid. Commanders then ordered risky reinforcements, flying additional aircraft deeper into Iranian airspace to support the extraction. The mission ultimately succeeded and helped avert what could have become a major political and military crisis in the US-Iran conflict. The F-15 pilot was recovered earlier in a rapid daylight operation carried out under heavy enemy fire from Iranian positions. The so-called rescue operation of the US Army, which was planned under the guise of an immediate free and escape operation on the pretext of rescuing its downed aircraft pilot at an abandoned airport in southern Isfahan, ended in complete failure with the timely presence of the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Following prior information and further examinations by experts present at the scene, it was determined that 2 C-130 military aircraft and 2 Black Hawk helicopters of the US Army were destroyed through the fulfillment of promise and help of Almighty God, as well as the sacred wrath of the soldiers of Islam and the powerful armed forces. This action increased the level of repeated failures of the US Army. It became clear to all that the cowardly and defeated US Army, in this imposed war, is not considered a dominant or superior force in the face of the divine will of the Iranian armed forces. Following this glorious and victorious operation, the defeated US president, hastily and falsely, through psychological warfare, tries to escape from the scene of defeat and, like in the past, continues his absurd claims and deflections. Although the reality of the battlefield itself demonstrates the superiority of the powerful armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
It is a manufactured ceasefire. We know that this is a tremendous defeat. The agreement that Trump was forced into, despite his threats, a defeat for Trump, a defeat for Netanyahu, a defeat for Mitsotakis, who supports Trump and Netanyahu in every possible way, American imperialism and the Zionist murderers.
Anger over the widening Middle East war spilled onto the streets of Europe as crowds surged toward Israeli diplomatic missions and government buildings, turning city squares into charged theaters of protest against Israel's strikes in Lebanon, even as US and Iran announced a fragile 2-week ceasefire. Demonstrators in multiple capitals accused Israel of sabotaging de-escalation efforts and dragging the region back toward open confrontation, while police formed tight cordons to prevent marches from reaching embassies and parliaments. In Athens, hundreds gathered outside the Embassy of Israel in Athens, waving Palestinian and Lebanese flags and chanting in solidarity with civilians caught in the crossfire. Protesters from groups such as March to Gaza and the Coalition Against the War condemned Israel's operations in Lebanon a day after the United States and Iran unveiled their ceasefire framework.
It is imperative that all involvement and participation by the Greek government ceases immediately. We must, through the people's uprising, put an end to the war economy so that all peoples can live freely with dignity and rights in every country.
Greek police ringed the compound as speakers denounced what they called a violation of the spirit of negotiations. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis had earlier described the Israeli strikes as completely counterproductive, remarks that were widely shared among the crowd. Lebanon's health ministry figures, cited by demonstrators, put the death toll from the latest strikes above 300, prompting a national day of mourning. Similar scenes unfolded in Milan, where dozens rallied in Piazza della Scala with banners backing Iran and Lebanon and demanding an end to U.S. and Israeli military action. Protesters criticized the Italian government, led by Giorgia Meloni, accusing Rome of political alignment with Washington and Tel Aviv, despite official statements about limiting arms transfers. Placards and speeches blended anti-war slogans with sharp denunciations of Israeli operations in Lebanon, reflecting how the conflict had become a lightning rod for wider political grievances across Europe.
Lebanese will be set on fire, and every drone will be shot down, and every soldier who thinks they can stroll through our lands will only face the resistance of a people who love their land and know it like the back of their hand. They are strong from the heights of their F-35s.
Tensions also flared in The Hague, where protesters clashed with police outside the Dutch parliament. Several arrests were reported as demonstrators blocked roads, set off smoke flares, and chanted while holding Palestinian and Lebanese flags. Some placards targeted Dutch leader Rob Jetten, accusing the government of moral complicity. The unrest coincided with reports that Israeli forces had conducted a rapid series of strikes against Hezbollah positions in Lebanon, despite the ceasefire applying only to U.S.-Iran hostilities. According to the United Nations, more than 1 million people in Lebanon, about a fifth of the population, had been displaced since fighting reignited in early March, with casualties surpassing 1,400. The protests came as senior American and Iranian delegations prepared to meet in Islamabad for talks aimed at stabilizing a volatile region where shipping through the Strait of Hormuz had already faced disruption.
Panic and anger in Washington after Iran-aligned militant groups targeted American diplomatic personnel and facilities. The militants ambushed the U.S. diplomats in Baghdad on April 8th, Reuters citing U.S. officials said. Much of the details surrounding the ambush is still unclear, but the incident appears to have crossed a U.S. red line. The militants carried out frequent drone and missile attacks, injuring U.S. troops and causing damage to key facilities during the war between Iran and Israel, U.S. The American facilities in Iraq also faced dozens of attacks. The U.S. State Department, on April 9th, summoned Iraq's ambassador to condemn the series of attacks by Iran-backed militias. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau summoned Iraqi Ambassador Nizar Kirullah to express strong condemnation of what the State Department described as egregious terrorist attacks, including the April 8th ambush of U.S. diplomats in Baghdad, according to an official readout. The Deputy Secretary emphasized that the Iraqi government has failed to prevent these attacks and said some elements linked to the government continue to provide political, financial, and operational cover to the militias. He also made it clear that the United States will not tolerate attacks on its interests and expects the Iraqi government to immediately take all necessary measures to dismantle Iran-aligned militia groups in Iraq. Iraq, long a proxy battleground between the United States and Iran, was quickly drawn into the wider Middle East conflict triggered by U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran on February 28th. Between March and April 9th, 2026, when U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire, powerful Iran-aligned militias operating under the banner of the Islamic Resistance in Iraq launched multiple drone and rocket attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad and other American-linked sites, creating a severe security crisis. These attacks included a March 2026 strike on the embassy's helipad, prompting U.S. officials to urge American citizens to leave Iraq. Beyond the embassy, drones and rockets targeted U.S. personnel and logistics infrastructure at Baghdad International Airport, Balad Air Base, and sites in Erbil. Militant groups also expanded their targets to include American energy companies, with drone strikes damaging facilities at the North Rumelia and Majnoon oil fields.
is furious, and his NATO allies might face his wrath. The US president has vowed to punish his allies who refuse to provide him access to their military bases during the Iran war. According to Financial Times, Trump's anger at France and Spain was the main focus of his meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on Wednesday. According to the report, Trump was irate during his meeting with Rutte and has reportedly threatened to punish the European states he deemed insufficiently supportive of the war.
What can you share with us from those conversations as we think about the future of the alliance?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as they would say in diplomatic circles, these conversations were frank and open. Which is good.
Candid. They may have been candid.
They even were candid, frank and open. But that's good, because we are amongst friends here. I mean, the president, myself, we like each other. We are good friends for many years now. And I'd rather have the conversation on the table instead of tiptoeing around it. I sensed his disappointment about the fact that he felt that too many allies were not with him. And I explained to him yesterday, I said, hey, Mr. President, clearly the overwhelming majority of Europeans have done what the US asked of him and what was previously agreed in these circumstances. And yes, sometimes it takes a bit of time. But hey, guess what? We have coalitions in Europe. We have sometimes the political home front to take care of. So sometimes it takes a couple of days. But then we pulled together, and almost the whole of Europe did, for the US to project power on the world stage through its partners in Europe. And the US, NATO is there, of course, to protect the Europeans, but also to protect the United States. As Jonas Sture, the Norwegian Prime Minister, said, these huge nuclear submarines in Russia are not there to attack Norway. They are there to attack the United States. And it is thanks to the alliance that we are able to make sure that they are not able to get in a position to do that. So, and this is just an example where both the US mainland and Europe stay stronger and safe because of the alliance. So it was a good conversation. It was open and candid. And I clearly felt his disappointment, which, again, to a certain extent, I understand.
In recent weeks, Trump has lashed out European nations for blocking the use of military bases or closing their airspace and accused NATO of not being there when the United States needed them.
I have a direct quote from the President of the United States on NATO, and I will share it with all of you. They were tested and they failed. And I would add, it's quite sad that NATO turned their backs on the American people over the course of the last 6 weeks when it's the American people who have been funding their defense. As you know, President Trump will be meeting with Secretary Rutte in a couple of hours here at the White House, and I know he looks forward to having a very frank and candid conversation with him.
Is the United States still considering withdrawing from NATO? Is that still a possibility?
It's something the President has discussed, and I think it's something the President will be discussing in a couple of hours with Secretary General Rutte, and perhaps you'll hear directly from the President following that meeting later this afternoon.
Among NATO allies, Spain banned the use of jointly operated Spanish-US bases in Rota and Moron for operations linked to the Iran war. Madrid also barred aircraft involved in attacks on Iran from using its airspace. Italy denied permission for US military aircraft involved in the conflict to refuel at the jointly operated Sigonella Air Base in Sicily. UK Prime Minister Starmer said that Britain would not be dragged into the war.
NATO is the single most effective military alliance the world has ever seen. And it has kept us safe for many decades, and we are fully committed to NATO. Secondly, that whatever the pressure on me and others, whatever the noise, I'm going to act in the British national interest in all the decisions that I make. And that's why I've been absolutely clear that this is not our war, and we're not going to get dragged into it. But I'm equally clear that when it comes to defence and security and our economic future, we have to have closer ties with Europe.
On Thursday, Trump, in a Truth Social post, had expressed disappointment with his European allies for not supporting the US military's campaign against Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump has issued a sharp message to NATO, expressing frustration with allies who have not supported his military stance against Iran. In a Truth Social post on Thursday, Trump criticized both international partners and domestic stakeholders, saying they failed to understand the situation without pressure. While he did not specify immediate actions, reports suggest he is considering reducing U.S. troop presence in member states that do not align with his approach. The comments come as Trump continues to push allies to take a more active role in securing key global trade routes, particularly the Strait of Hormuz. The corridor is critical, carrying roughly 20% of the world's oil supply, and has been under heightened tension since hostilities between U.S., Israel, and Iran began in February. At a recent meeting, U.S. officials outlined expectations for Allied support. A coalition led by the United Kingdom, involving more than 40 countries, has agreed in principle to help secure maritime traffic once conditions stabilize. On Thursday, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, too, told Parliament that Rome backs the coalition to secure the strategic waterway, currently under Iranian control. This development follows a tentative 14-day ceasefire agreement between the United States and Iran. However, the truce remains uncertain. Ongoing tensions between Iran and Israel, particularly over whether the ceasefire extends to Lebanon, have raised doubts about its durability. With Iran yet to fully reopen the strait and clarity still lacking, it remains uncertain whether NATO allied forces will proceed with planned deployments.
Starting quite clearly from the international situation that we are currently experiencing and from Italy's international standing, a standing which it's important to remember was not invented by this government but has remained exactly the same for approximately 80 years now. I say this now to respond in advance before before the now obvious refrain about my alleged subservience to American President Trump takes the stage, or the even more predictable one titled, Meloni must choose between Trump and Europe. Here again, I will explain my point of view on this matter, but I'll take this opportunity to ask for some clarification myself, because the Italian position in the Iranian crisis was exactly the same as that of the main European countries. So, I ask myself and I ask you if when it said we must stand with Europe, it truly means Europe, or if it rather means the European left, even when this implies dividing Europe. Because I fear the two things are not compatible, and I clearly await a confident answer. Meanwhile, as you know, during the night between Tuesday and Wednesday, a temporary mutually agreed ceasefire was negotiated between Iran, the United States of America, and their respective allies in the conflict that began on February 28th of this year. We have come to the brink of no return, but now we have before us a faint prospect of peace that must be pursued with determination. Italy expresses its sincere appreciation to Pakistan's President Sharif, who has taken on the burden of this difficult negotiation with the support of other regional actors. We now hope that the peace talks, which will commence in just a few hours in Islamabad, will be able to reinforce the broad general points of the agreement, and that within these discussions there will be room for the priorities that Italy, alongside its European partners, has consistently advocated for since the very first day. In the same way, obviously, we unequivocally condemn any and all forms of violation of the ceasefire, cessation, permanent cessation of hostilities, a halt to attacks against the Gulf countries, an end to military operations in Lebanon, Iran's renunciation of its nuclear program and the constant threat against regional neighbors and beyond, full restoration of freedom of movement in the Strait of Hormuz, which must not be subject to any form of restriction, as appears to have occurred in recent hours. This remains one of the most critical points in the agreement's implementation phase, because if Iran were to succeed in obtaining the right to apply additional duties to transits in the Strait, this could still lead to economic consequences and a reorientation of commercial flows, which are currently unforeseeable. It is therefore a priority interest for Italy and its Western European partners that freedom of navigation be fully restored to the conditions prior to February 28th, so as to normalize the tense situation in the energy markets, critical raw materials, fertilizers, and other essential products for our economy.
Ich dachte auch, diese viralen Übersetzungsohrhörer wären nur ein weiterer Schwindel. 8 Monate später...
On this point, we are already working with the Coalition for the Strait of Hormuz, promoted by the United Kingdom and which includes over 30 countries, to try and build security conditions that will allow the full restoration of freedom of navigation and supply, a contribution we believe is important in this negotiation phase. This positive glimmer of a resolution to the crisis with Iran, however, does not diminish a more comprehensive discussion that we are duty-bound to address, because it is undeniable that we are currently experiencing a moment of particular difficulty in the relations between Europe and the United States. But it's equally undeniable that the current American administration has accelerated a path that had been widely anticipated by previous administrations, both Republican and Democratic, to progressively turn its attention away from Europe, to focus on global competition with China, thereby choosing the Indo-Pacific as its priority geostrategic quadrant. A clear trajectory that European leaderships of the recent past have for a very long time, and in my view quite culpably, chosen not to grasp, including specifically those who were governing in Italy, and who are quite content with merely a pat on the back, or a simple tweet of endorsement whenever they were forming a brand new government. History, in short, is knocking at the door, and Europe is called upon not to fail this crucial test. To do so, it must adapt its strategy to a world that is changing at lightning speed, prioritizing the principle of reality over bureaucratic superstructures and ideological dogmas. It is in this perspective that our relentless commitment in Brussels must be viewed, for the support of competitiveness, for bureaucratic simplification, for a green transition that is realistic and not ideological.
Iran's retaliatory strikes have done what decades of insurgencies and wars never could, crippling key American military bases across the Gulf. According to the Middle East Eye, at least a dozen US military sites across the Gulf region have been so badly damaged by the Iranian strikes that their presence now creates more vulnerabilities than benefits. According to a March 25 report in the New York Times, Iran has forced several American troops to relocate to hotels and office spaces throughout the region. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps had urged citizens to report the new location as it hunted for the dispersed American troops. The Donald Trump administration is yet to acknowledge the extent of the damage sustained due to the Iranian strikes. Mark Lynch, director of the Project on Middle East Political Science at George Washington University, told the Middle East Eye that the Iranian military rendered the physical architecture of American primacy useless in the span of a month. Access to these US military sites, some of which are logistical hubs and not necessarily active bases, is tightly controlled by both the Pentagon and the Gulf states themselves, including Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Qatar, and Oman. Altogether, there are 19 disclosed sites run by the US military across the Middle East region, an area that runs from Egypt across to Iraq and from northern Syria down to southern Oman, the Middle East Eye reported. Lynch said that he received pictures from the naval support activity in Bahrain, which houses some 9,000 military. Lynch said, and I quote, "The entire purpose of America's Middle East has come crashing down, and we don't have an alternative way yet of articulating or thinking about what might replace it." Preeta Parsi, Executive Vice President, Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, told the website that the last 7 weeks of war made it clear that the Gulf states could no longer fully rely on Washington, D.C. as a security partner. A fragile ceasefire, control over the Strait of Hormuz, and widening arc of influence has fueled a perception that Iran has emerged more powerful across the Gulf. A fragile ceasefire, a widening arc of influence and control over the world's most critical oil choke point taken together are fueling a growing perception that Iran is emerging from the conflict not just intact, but more powerful across the Gulf than before the war began. In the immediate aftermath of weeks of sustained strikes, Tehran is signaling confidence, militarily, politically, and economically. Its leadership has framed the ceasefire as being shaped on its own terms, while continuing to warn of retaliation across multiple fronts, from Lebanon to the Red Sea. But the deeper shift is geographic. Control, or even the ability to intermittently disrupt the Strait of Hormuz, has long been Iran's strongest lever. Now, after repeated missile and drone operations across the Gulf, that leverage appears to have moved from theoretical to operational. According to various assessments emerging after the ceasefire, Iran has effectively demonstrated that it can hold shipping, energy infrastructure, and coastal economies at risk across the region, from the UAE and Kuwait to Saudi Arabia's eastern energy hubs. That changes the equation for Gulf states. For decades, security in the region rested on a U.S.-led umbrella, but the recent conflict has exposed the limits of that model. Despite American military presence and advanced air defense systems, attacks continued across multiple countries, and key infrastructure remained vulnerable. The result is a subtle but significant recalibration. Instead of relying solely on external protection, Gulf states may now be forced to adapt to a reality where Iran cannot be neutralized, but only managed.
Bluetooth mode.